Okay, good morning everybody. We're going to do a recipe that I used for many of the 38 years when I was in the classroom. This is an all-purpose dough, and when I would do this with the students, each student would make a ball of dough, which I'm going to show you how to do, cut it into quarters, and they would make a 4-course meal out of it. So today I'm just going to show you how to make the dough, and we're going to make the first course, which is Indian Naan Bread, N-A-A-N. So we're going to start with 2 cups of flour. Actually, we're going to start with the recipe. Here is the list of ingredients, and you can stop the video and take a look at that and jot it down so you know exactly what we're using. But very simple stuff. So we're going to start with 2 cups of flour, and if you've never watched Martha Stewart, you know you've got to measure and cut off the top, otherwise more is not always better. And these are half cups, so I'm going to do 4 of these for my 2 cups. And that leaves me a little bit extra for kneading if I need it. Usually I don't. Let's get the last of that in there. And I'm beginning with the dry ingredients. I just find it easier to do it that way. So we've got our 2 cups of flour. We're going to use a half teaspoon of yeast. And we're going to use a half teaspoon of sugar to feed the yeast, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and I'm just going to eyeball that. Okay, so we've got all of that. Those are our dry ingredients. We're just going to stir that around, and then we're going to start working on the wet ingredients. So we've got 2 tablespoons of oil. I like to use a neutral oil, and the oil of choice for me is grapeseed oil. And it doesn't have a high flavor, or it doesn't have a flavor, and it has a high flash rate, so it's safe to use. And if people that say, oh, olive oil doesn't have a flavor, really try making popcorn with it and tell me it doesn't have a flavor. All right, now we need 1/3 cup of yogurt, which I have in the refrigerator, and I'll get that in a second. And we need an egg yolk. So I'm going to just separate this. Okay, so there's our egg yolk. And now I'm going to grab the yogurt. And you want to make sure that you use non-flavored yogurt. Occasionally I'd have a student who would bring in banana flavor or something, and their flatbread had a very strange flavor to it. All right, so I'm gonna pull up my little 1/3 cup measurement here. These little nesting dolls, one of the best gifts I was ever given by a gal I used to teach with in California. And I use these probably 3 or 4 times a day sometimes. All right, so there's 1/3 cup of yogurt. And I'm mixing that with the oil and the egg yolk. And other than the water, those are the wet ingredients. So I'm going to mix that up until it's nice and smooth and creamy. And I'm going to start adding that to the dry ingredient. Okay, now we're going to start mixing this together without adding any water yet. I can tell you that in 38 years of doing this recipe, I almost never use the whole half cup of water. And you have to be patient. If it doesn't look like it's where you want it in the first few minutes, that's just because you got to work it a little bit more. If you dump in a whole half cup of water, you're going to wind up having to add more flour, and then all of your ingredient ratio is off. All right, so I'm mixing this up, and now I'm going to start adding a little bit of water at a time. And I'm using the back of a spatula, but you can use a spoon. Some people like to do it in a machine with their pastry hook or whatever. I'm not a big fan of that because the texture of the dough is really important. And if you're turning it all over to a machine, the machine has no idea what is correct and what isn't correct. And at a certain point, you're going to have to get your hands involved. And that's really how I can tell when the dough is right. All right, this is coming together, but it's still got some crumbles on the side, but it's real close. So I'm gonna add the tiniest bit of water. And that may be all of the water I need for this batch. And if you look at, there's my half cup of water, and I've used very little. And this feels like it's almost exactly right. Okay, just a sprinkle or two is it. Okay, now you start working the dough, and if it's crumbly when you start to break it apart, just brush some water on it. Not a lot. All right. Okay, that feels about right. Now, you can let this sit in plastic and put it in the fridge till you're ready to work with it later. If I do, I put a little bit of oil in the plastic bag. But since we're gonna work with at least part of this right now, we are gonna take the dough and we're gonna quarter this, and it doesn't have to be exact. Okay, so now each one of those quarters is gonna be something completely different. And I'm gonna take some of my flour here, sprinkle it out so we can roll this out. Now, if you've never tried to roll something out into roughly a circle, then you're not gonna be familiar with how tricky it is. Take your rolling pin, pull it back towards you gently, then do a quarter turn. Then pull it back again, then a quarter turn, and pull it back. I know you've seen rolling back and forth, but that's how you wind up having your dough shaped more like a map of Florida than a circle. This tends to work a lot better. Now, because I'm gonna do naan bread, I don't want it real thick because it can be doughy on the inside if it is. Nice and thin is the way to go. And we are just about there. Okay, so we're gonna take this and we're going to put it in a skillet. I brought a skillet just for this purpose, and absolutely no oil. We're gonna cook this on a medium-high heat and keep all oil away from it, and it's gonna come out a nice golden color and be some of the best Indian naan bread you've ever had. Slightly hot. We're gonna cook it on like a medium heat. Absolutely no oil. Now I've got a fork here, and I don't want to scratch my pan, but occasionally the flatbread will start to bubble. It'll get little pockets in it as the yeast cooks, and you just want to pop those with a fork so that you don't wind up getting a giant pocket bread. Now, if you like that, and I would tell my students sometimes, just give it a little tap with a fork as it's getting started, and then you're less likely to have that issue. Okay, so this is done, and you can see it's got the beautiful color on it. Looks like almost like a Jewish matzo. But I had an Indian parishioner back on the West Coast, and while his wife was visiting India, he was starving because the women do all the cooking. And I took him on a picnic and served this with some chicken and some other stuff. He went ballistic. He wanted to know which Indian bakery I'd gone to get it. And it took a long time to convince him I made this. Anyhow, so this is perfect when it's hot out of the pan. It's perfect with some melted butter or hummus, whatever you're into. That's course number 1. Watch for the future videos. We'll be doing course number 2, 3, and dessert, all from the same ball of dough. Thanks very much, and God bless.